Coming up on this week's show, CB Lee talks to us about the latest in her Sidekick series.
This is the Big Gay Fiction Podcast, the show for avid readers and passionate fans of gay romance fiction. Each week, we bring you exclusive author interviews, book recommendations, and explore the latest in gay pop culture.
Welcome to episode 191 of the Big Gay Fiction Podcast. I'm Jeff from JeffAdamsWrites.com, and with me as always is my co-host and husband, Mr. Will Knauss.
Hello, everybody.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you in part by our remarkable community on Patreon. A big thanks to Paranthe for joining us. We'll have more information on how you can join them at the end of the show, along with a sneak peek of what we have coming up for you next week.
So here we are, the first weekend of June. Happy Pride, everybody.
Happy Pride. Yes, indeed. Pride 2019 is kicked off. Which features at the heart of it a celebration of Stonewall 50, which I'm sure we'll talk more about as the month goes along. Something that struck me yesterday as Pride Month kicked off, well, actually that'd be Saturday as Pride Month kicked off, I found a video in my Facebook feed from the NHL and the NHL Players Association celebrating Pride. And I have to say it was like one of the best things I've ever seen. Of course, hockey is my sport. Hockey has long been at the forefront of trying for equality in sports, along with their partnership with the You Can Play program. And I really thought it was just a tremendous video showing really how all of the teams, and there's 31 NHL teams right now, each of them celebrates a Pride Night at some point during their season. It's tremendous to see that from a professional organization, and I can only imagine what a video like that would have meant for me as a kid watching hockey, growing up knowing I was gay and being very closeted living in the South. So thank you, NHL, for that beautiful video. Thank you to all of the corporations and organizations out there celebrating Pride Month, because Pride is still so very important to everyone in the LGBTQ community. So yeah, that's my little Pride moment for this week.
Cool. Now you had a big moment this week.
Netminder, the fourth and final book of the Codename Winger series, did release this past Tuesday. Got some love from all corners of the internet, which was really cool to see. Some things that happened last week. I got interviewed by Lee Wynn over on the I'm Here, I'm Queer, What the Hell Do I Read blog, which was really cool. I recently reviewed Lee's book, Queer as a $5 Bill, on the show. And Lee's actually going to be here in episode 194, which will drop on June 24th, to talk about the book and this YA blog that he's got, which is a really tremendous resource for YA literature featuring LGBTQ characters. So that was pretty darn cool. Mm-hmm. I also got a review on Rainbow Book Reviews that I'll drop a link to in the show notes, that Serena Yates there really enjoyed the finale. I was so glad to hear that. Serena's been a big advocate for the series, giving each of the books good reviews, which I so much appreciate. But the fact that she thought I wrapped it up well was meaningful. I don't watch Game of Thrones. I think I watched 10 minutes of the first episode and went, not for me. But I'm very aware that the fandom was outraged at the ending, and I didn't want to outrage the fans that I've got with my ending, and so far so good on that. Coming up this week, I got a couple more of blog posts out in the world. I'm going to be at Love Bites. Hi, Danny, we love you. With a post, excerpt, and giveaway. And then on Wednesday, June 5th, I'll be at the Harmony Inc. blog with I did a little fun top 5 things we learned about Theo during the series that really don't relate to him being a spy. It's more about him just being a kid and a normal guy. So I'll be wrapping up my promo stuff with that this week.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So some Pride stuff going on, and some stuff that you guys can look at from what's going on here in Sacramento. The Queer Sacramento Authors Collective read this past Friday night at the Lavender Library, as we do each quarter. And there's some live video that you could check out on the Big Gay Fiction Podcast Facebook page from that event. Kim Fielding, Mike Lopez, Pat Henshaw, Amy Lane, Steffi Lenk, and myself all read from some of our published work. And E.S. Wynn and Liz Fraham read from some works in progress. I always love going to these things. I love hearing what our author friends are working on. I have to give a particular shout out to Kim Fielding, who read from her latest Stars in Peril book, which I can't wait to get my own reading eyeballs on. And Amy Lane read from String Boys, which I wanted to read the book because of Rhys Dante's awesome cover. And now that I've heard Amy read from it, I want to read it even more. And we've got another event here in Sacramento coming up on Thursday, June 6th. We're going to be at the Time Tested Bookstore, which is an independent store here in town. And starting at 7 o'clock Pacific time, there'll be readings from myself, J. Scott Coatsworth, Liz Fraham, Pat Henshaw, Davin Kitt, Amy Lane, Stephanie Lake, and E.S. Wynn. We'll be live streaming that as well on the Big Gay Fiction Facebook page, so you can check out the goings on there. And if you're in Sacramento, come on down and say hello, because I think it's going to be fun.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I forced this one into hosting, so you could check him out doing hosting duties as well.
It's going to be a lot of fun kicking off Pride.
Yeah.
One other quick note, on June 1st, registration for Coastal Magic Con 2020 opened. Now, I know it's a little early to be thinking about events in 2020, but now is the time to kind of take a look at what Jennifer has set up for next year's convention. It's really good, people.
Yeah, I mean, we'd always heard how good Coastal was. We were there this year, and we are so eager to go back because, the beach in February, you cannot undersell the beach in the middle of winter. The featured author lineup is so good this year, and in particular, the gay romance authors are coming out in force. And among the ones that we found on the list this year, Zoe Axelrod, Brew Baker, Macy Blake, Casey Byrne, Mary Calmay, Charlie Cochet, Katie Hawthorne, Kieran Kelly, Cordelia Kingsbridge, Amy Lane, Morgan Bryce, Megan Maslow, Z.A. Maxfield, Terry Michaels, Victoria Sue, and of course Damon Suede will no doubt be unleashing some crazy town movie for Cinema Craptastique.
Mm-hmm. Now, the con takes place February 20th through the 23rd next year in 2020. You can get all the details and register at coastalmagicconvention.com.
High school hockey player, computer whiz, covert agent. Theo Reese's life is split between being a normal teenager and a secret agent who goes by the codename Winger. After years of providing mission support from behind his keyboard, he's thrust into an unexpected world of adventure and danger. In Tracker Hacker, the first book in the codename Winger series by Jeff Adams, it becomes personal for Theo as an enemy organization compromises Tactical Operational Support's agent tracker system. Among the missing agents, his father. Theo puts his life on the line to stop the hack and rescue his dad. Diverse Reader says, "Wow, talk about a wild ride from beginning to end. I could not stop reading." Discover the world of codename Winger with Tracker Hacker. Available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook, as narrated by John Solo.
Now, one way that you can celebrate the beginning of Pride Month is by going to the movies. We certainly did that this past weekend when Rocketman opened. It's, of course, the biopic about Elton John. And my one sentence review is it's just fucking awesome. It's really damn good, people. It really, really is.
It exceeded every expectation I had for it, which were pretty high because the ads looked super good. I didn't expect it to be as much of a musical as it is, that there are some burst out into songs and have some choreography. It's not just performance footage or in-studio stuff, which delighted my musical theater heart to death. Mm-hmm. And I really didn't know what to expect with, I cannot pronounce his name.
Taron Egerton?
Thank you. The guy from Kingsman. To be able to take on this role. I mean, it was a lot like, I didn't know how Rami Malek would become Freddie Mercury, and it was very much the same thing with Taron. He's extraordinary, and his singing is so good. Mm-hmm. I can't undersell this movie at all because it's so freaking awesome. I'm trying to pick out something specific to even call out, but the whole thing, even down to its structure, where it starts kind of, in the future, then goes back through childhood and then comes up and goes forward. It really details his childhood up through when he essentially made his comeback with I'm Still Standing, that wonderful video as he came out of rehab, some 20 years ago now. Just extraordinary.
Yeah, longer than that. What you're speaking about is something that's actually pretty interesting. From a structure, storytelling, and filmmaking standpoint, Rocketman doesn't break any new ground. It's a pretty straightforward biopic. You've got Elton's rise to fame and then his fall and then his essential comeback, which is something that we've seen, dozens, if not hundreds of times before. But what this movie excels at is it's charming, it's relatable, it's very interesting, and it all really hinges on Taron Egerton's remarkable performance. Mm-hmm. I think there's always a danger when you are portraying the life of someone so well known that I think for a lesser filmmaker or a lesser actor, you might immediately go to that it's more important to do an impression of this person or this personality. And that's not what's going on here in Rocketman. And it certainly isn't what happened in We Will Rock You either.
Well, Bohemian Rhapsody.
I'm so sorry. I got the songs mixed up. What they've done is these particular actors have really delved into the characters that they're portraying.
The other thing I liked about it, and I say this as I have not seen Bohemian Rhapsody, but I've heard how it portrayed Freddie. In this case, this movie is unabashedly gay. The relationship that Elton had with his first manager, those two were in a relationship. They have sex 2 or 3 times on screen. It does not pull back. It does not whitewash it. It just is. And that was certainly one of the criticisms in the Queen movie, is that they kind of tried to brush a lot of his sexuality to the side. And that doesn't happen here, which makes it an even better movie to go see for Pride Month. It was wonderful. So yeah, go see Rocketman. Now, I kicked off my Pride Month of reading with a book I've been so eager to get my hands on, A Lover's Game by Max Walker, with the audiobook narrated by Greg Brudeau. So happy that this 4th book in Max's Stonewall investigation series released in audio. I've been eagerly awaiting this final installment of the series, and I was so not disappointed by it. The series has been working up to a final showdown between private investigator Zane Holden and the Unicorn Killer. The Unicorn has loomed large over this series. He's a serial killer that has terrorized the gay community in New York City. He goes after partnered gay men, and Zane's husband was among the victims. In the first book, we find out that the unicorn is returned, and now in this 4th one, Zane is obsessed with bringing the reign of terror to an end. At the same time, Zane is preparing for his wedding to Enzo, the defense attorney who captured his heart in that first book. Now, unfortunately, Zane is so occupied with this case that he's missing things, like the cake testing and venue selection. And that's a bad thing when you're preparing for a wedding. And he hasn't told Enzo that he's actually working on this case. Zane thinks he's protecting Enzo by keeping his activities a secret, but once that's revealed, Enzo feels that he's actually being put in more danger because he doesn't know what's going on. And oh my God, everything hurtles to such a massive, satisfying conclusion here. Max had me super stressed this entire week while I was reading this book. He always does a great job of creating suspense, but here, though, he had me so ratcheted up, I suspected everything. Is that Uber driver the killer, perhaps? Is that bottle of wine perhaps spiked that they're now having? What is that person who's just looked at them on the street? Is that somebody important? Is the person that Zane's interviewing perhaps giving information, or is it misinformation? I suspected everything, which only made me more stressed. And I yet never figured out who the unicorn was ahead of the reveal. And I loved that I could not sort that out. And while Zane and Enzo have been featured in these middle 2 books of the series, it was really great to see them return to the spotlight, which you don't always see. Usually when you're done and you get somebody that they're happy, you don't get to come back to them as the central characters. And in this case, I really like that. their dynamic as a couple as they move towards their wedding date was wonderful to watch. The quiet, sexy moments that they share along with their wedding planning and the time they spend with Enzo's family and their amazing friends. It really shows that this super strong relationship that they've got. And boy, are there some sexy times in this book too. Max always works in really good steamy scenes, but I think he just knocked it over the top with this one because, yeah, them on the balcony, mercy people. Now Max contrasts these happy times with how they handle the increasing threats. They really want to be strong for each other, but also want to keep each other safe. And at times, this really breaks down to where, like, one of them thinks they're being really selfless, but the other one thinks they're being really selfish in keeping what they're keeping, secrets and what to share. It's an interesting dynamic there that Max really did a great job with. And it's that effort to maintain the balance that, again, only increases the tension because they've got their internal conflict now along with this guy who might be trying to kill them. I both hated and loved what Max put them through, but that just makes it more realistic. And is it weird to say that I liked the terrible choices they were making? I mean, despite being great at their jobs, they really did some things that were like, why are you doing this right now? Why aren't you getting this help? Or why aren't you talking to somebody else? These two are flawed, and that makes them even, again, more human. And there were times I wanted to scream at them like I was watching a horror movie because it's like, no, don't do that. Lastly, kudos to Greg Bruneau. He does such a great job in this series overall, but I have to shout out his work voicing the unicorn. It was creepy, but yet this very calm, evil voice that really made me shudder sometimes. So good job all. Now the spinoff for this series, Stonewall Investigations Miami, also got it set up in this book. And the first book, Bad Idea, just released last week, and I cannot wait to pick it up as soon as there's an audio version. So, Max, I hope you've got Greg working on that soon, really. So yeah, Max Walker's A Lover's Game and the entire Stonewall Investigation series should be on everybody's TBR this summer for sure.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, I have a few quick recommendations. On May 22nd, it was Harvey Milk Day, and I want to quickly call back to a book I recommended last year. It's called Pride, The Story of Harvey Milk and the Rainbow Flag. It is by Rob Sanders, and it tells the story of Harvey and his activism and his friend Gilbert Baker and how they together created the Rainbow Flag. So if you haven't checked this book out, I still highly recommend it. If you're wondering what the author Rob Sanders has been up to, he has a brand new book this year. This year's book is called Stonewall, A Building, an Uprising, a Revolution. It's written by Rob Sanders and, of course, illustrated by a guy named Jamie Kristoff. This is a really wonderful children's book filled with beautiful illustrations by Kristoff. And what's really lovely and kind of unique about this particular book is it tells the history of the Stonewall riots through the eyes of the building itself. The building is the main character, and it sort of talks about its history and the things that have happened within its walls. It's really wonderful and charming, and a great way to discuss Stonewall and gay history with your younger children. So I highly recommend checking out Stonewall by Rob Sanders.
I have to give a shout out to that cover. I love the artwork on that cover. It's so gorgeous.
The whole book is really, really beautiful. Definitely, everyone, I think that you should check it out. Also, one book I want to highly recommend is a book called The Stonewall Riots, Coming Out in the Streets. It's by Gayle E. Pitman. And now this is a book primarily meant for older kids. It's sort of written in chapter book style. And what's really interesting about this particular book is, of course, commemorating Stonewall 50. What it manages to do is it takes 50 different items, whether it's photographs of places or people or objects, and it arranges these objects chronologically, and it tells the story of the LGBTQ rights movement before, during, and after Stonewall. I'm in the middle of reading it right now. It's really wonderful. It's got a simple, very straightforward style, and it's jam-packed with information. Some of the stuff I did know, some of it I did not. So it's even educating me.
That's very cool.
I think this is actually a really remarkable book. And if you want to talk about the riots or gay history in general with some of your older kids, maybe in grade school, I think this is the go-to book. It's by Gayle E. Pitman, The Stonewall Riots.
Awesome.
Now, if you're looking for some other titles, you might want to check out Martin Duberman's book about Stonewall. Back in 1994, Duberman wrote a book that essentially became the de facto resource when it came to the Stonewall riots. Well, this year, in celebration of Stonewall 50, he's completely re-edited and revised the book. The new title is, let me take a quick breath, it's called Stonewall, The Definitive History of the LGBTQ Rights Uprising That Changed America. It's a really long title, but it's an exceptional book. So I think everyone, if you're interested in the nuance and history of that particular event and the rights movement that followed, Duberman's book is the go-to resource. It still is. It was back then, and it is still now. And one other thing I want to mention is a book called The Stonewall Reader. And what makes this book interesting and unique is that it was edited by the New York Public Library. What they did is they essentially went back into their expansive archives and essentially curated different historical pieces, whether it's documents or first-person accounts of the event itself, and news stories, things like that. They collected it all together in one book. So if you're interested in sort of historical fact and records, you should probably check out the Stonewall Reader.
Awesome. Now I want to read all the books.
I know. Now, I know that was a whole lot of titles that I just threw at you, but guess what? We have a resource so that you can find links and information about all the books that we just talked about.
That's right. All you have to do to find all that stuff is go to the show notes page on biggayfictionpodcast.com for episode 191.
Want to hang out with us between shows? Check us out on Facebook. You never know what we might post. News about book sales, bonus video content, and maybe even a live broadcast or two. Like us today at facebook.com/biggayfictionpodcast and see what we get up to next.
Was so excited to get to talk to C.B. Lee. We talked to her last year in April when we were doing the LA Times Festival of Books. We talked a little bit about the Sidekick Squad series. Then the brand new book, Not Your Backup, comes out on Tuesday, June 4th, and we have all the details on that book, plus the overall origins for the Sidekick series. Welcome, CB, to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's very exciting. We got to see you last year at the LA Times Festival of Books for a little teeny tiny interview, but we're thrilled to have you back as we start to talk about Not Your Backup, which will come out on June 4th, just the day after this airs, actually.
Oh my gosh, that will be really exciting. Actually times up really perfectly. I actually am holding, I actually got to touch the advanced copies for the first time last week at Y'all West, which, due to the fun time jumps of podcasting,
well, actually, it's been about a month ago.
Right. But yeah, it was really interesting just to hold it for the first time and see it in print. Granted, the advanced copies have typos since I went through and did all the passwords with the typos, but it's fun. It's fun. It's great that it exists. It's in physical form. Hasn't quite felt real till now, but now it's a real book, or will be very soon, or tomorrow for your listeners and readers.
There is something about holding that physical copy, even if you see it, even if it's on your tablet as an ebook, it's like there's nothing like that paperback when it gets there.
Yeah.
Now, Not Your Backup is book 3 in the Sidekick Squad series, and for those who haven't experienced this series or heard of it, tell us what this series is all about.
Sure. It is about a group of queer teens that take on a corrupt government superhero agency, and they live in this sort of post-dystopian world where superheroes are kind of treated like celebrities, and there's a shadowy government organizations and mysterious heroes, League of Heroes, that kind of dictates who gets to be a hero and who gets to be a villain. And our protagonists all kind of uncover this huge conspiracy, and then they work together to build a resistance and take it down.
It's quite the world that you've built here. I mean, you hit so many things there: dystopian U.S. future, superheroes, villains. What was your inspiration for all of this?
So I've always been fascinated by kind of that like post-apocalyptic or dystopian worlds, but a lot of the media that I've read mostly focuses on kind of when you're in the middle of the disaster, when you're in the middle of the catastrophe, when everything is going wrong, how are people struggling to survive? So I really wanted to see a world that was, so this is more of like a solar punk take where the world has started to move forward, where, it's 100 years after all of these disasters have happened. So kind of the impetus for the superpowers in my book is a really extremely intense solar flare that catalyzes a latent gene in people. And then after the flare, which knocks out a bunch of nuclear power plants, also starts kind of the chain reaction of a bunch of environmental disasters. So 100 years later, the world has kind of the governments of the world have kind of shifted and changed. There's been wars, there's been fights over resources. So the United States is now part of the North American collective, which is the entire continent of North America, which is now the habitable places are, there's, 24 regions, which is, kind of what's left of the states. So there's different areas all across North America, which are now the regions in which people live and continue to move forward with like their amazing technology and hover tech and all of this amazing clean technology. But at the same time, you have all of these like high tech cities. But outside of those regions, everything else is like the unmaintained lands. So the government's claiming there's radiation danger and don't venture out. But of course, our heroes are like, what the government tells us isn't necessarily true. So a lot of actually the fun of writing Not Your Backup is that it actually like kind of one of my working titles was Not Your Road Trip, because there's a lot of road tripping in this book.
Yeah, I noticed there's a bit of a road trip in the sneak peek that I got to read too. They're out on this road trip to essentially on a mission. Right.
Yeah, there's the heist in the beginning of the very first chapter. But yeah, there's a lot of fun. We get to see a little bit more of the country outside of the cities in this book, so that's exciting.
Now, each of the books deals with one of the main heroes, if you will, or the sidekicks, if you will, given the name, given the titles of the book, but they're really the heroes. In Not Your Backup, we focus on Emma, who is really the only one of them without the powers. What's kind of happening to our heroes this time out?
So at the end of Not Your Villain, we have destroyed the registry, which is the big name of everyone who's ever registered with powers that Captain Orion was planning to use to kidnap people and use for experiments. And there's really, at that point, our heroes have been looking for the resistance the whole time. And they realize, they find a mysterious group that's been leaving messages on encrypted channels. But then at the end of the book, or they realize that this is actually like a group of nerds that have been joining together to watch banned like movies like Star Wars and Harry Potter and stuff. So they realize that they need to start the resistance. So that's where we are at the beginning of Not Your Backup, where Emma and Bells are back in Nevada, and they are kind of in the midst of this fledgling resistance group. Meanwhile, Jess and Abby are at the Villains Guild hideout in the Rockies, and they're trying to corral all the other metahumans into taking action. So the beginning of the book, we're kind of everyone has different goals, but then they all come together. But yeah, it's more about like building the resistance and finding. For Emma, it's her journey in finding who she is, and really, she's a very natural leader. She loves coming up with plans, and she's definitely a Gryffindor. She's the first to like jump in and try to take action. Her default is like fight me, but she also is, as you mentioned, she doesn't have powers. And so when she's trying to take a more active role in the resistance, she kind of meets, butts heads with a few of the other members as they have different ideas about who is and who isn't part of the resistance.
She just needs to remind them that Batman didn't have powers either. He just had a really good utility belt and brains. So she could definitely fill that role. What's been the driving force behind deciding the type of character that you have at the forefront of each book? Because the three books have very different, distinct character types and personalities, and just everything about them is just they're just very different from each other. Mm-hmm.
So from the beginning, I wanted to tell this story about this fun adventure story with queer protagonists. So each book would center another one of them in the main four. So and then after Not Your Backup, there's one more book, which will be Abby's story. And so she will round out the quartet. But each of their, they have very different personalities, but it's been interesting writing their stories because each of them are on their own journey and what makes them a hero and finding how do they define success and how do other people see them and how do they see themselves. So for each story, because we're moving forward in time, as we get to see, who is really, it's been interesting because, all four books will fit together with as a series, but in each book, everyone gets to have their own journey.
Which I really like, because we've been introduced to all of them all the way back, back in the first book, but then they get to their own story, which could essentially be read as a standalone if you wanted to, I guess. Although reading all of them together is much better. What was the bigger challenge, to come up with the trajectory of these four diverse characters, or to build this alternate universe of the U.S.? Or were they kind of equal challenges?
I feel like the challenge for me is I'm not like a great outliner, or I haven't ever really been a planner. So I've always been more of the pantser in the writing style. So when writing a series, so when I wrote Not Your Sidekick, I didn't know up until I think I was about 50,000 words in when I realized that I could not basically solve the problem in that one book. And I realized, because when I pitched it, it was one book. And then I was like, well, I really love all of these characters. There's a bigger story here behind, that I've introduced. And I will need more than one book to solve it. And so from the get-go, I knew the next story after Jess would be Belle's, because you get into like the backstory of the metahuman training and the Heroes League of Heroes. And so kind of, I think overall just planning a series is really challenging. Some people are great at it where, they're very detailed outlines. They know from the very beginning to the very end, like what the key points are going to be. And so as I was writing book one, I kind of had a panic attack where I was like, oh no, I have to figure out what's going to happen in each of the books. And then as I restructured kind of things, and then writing book two and then three, it's kind of come up to the point where I'm working on book four. And now like everything one of the reasons why it took me a longer time between books. So Not Your Villain came out in 2017. And Not Your Backup is coming out in 2019. So I didn't have a book come out last year because I was still working on kind of crafting the storyline, because whatever I did or didn't do in book 3 would determine what would happen in book 4. So everything had to like fall into place, and I had to like figure out a lot of stuff. So it took it was challenging, but I think, you know, it's still challenging, but that's part of the joy of writing, is to figure out how to tell the story you want to tell.
If you do a series again, do you think you'll try to do outlines more in the upfront, or now that you've had this experience, do you kind of know how to do it and keep your pantser ways going on?
I don't know if I'll ever, like, I feel like with each book, I'm like, oh, do I know how to write a novel now? But like every book is its own challenge. I do have a better sense of like, okay, how do I plot as a pantser? And I'm plotting for pantsers, and like learning how to, like, for me, I just tend to think of it as like an outline, like a roadmap, where I have these destinations I want to hit, but I'm not committed to, like, I don't have to see everything. And if I go off track or take a different route, that's okay as well. So as long as I kind of get the same, like, it's all in the journey of how I get there. Mm-hmm. And then the destinations that I pick along the way, if I get them or not, that's cool. I kind of have these benchmarks that I want to reach. But I really like thinking of the framework in which I think about my books as a roadmap. So I'll try to plan out my, all the cities I want to visit, but I'm open to discovering places along the way and kind of building up on that.
Mm-hmm. How does the pantser sort of method work while you're world building, or do you try to, at least before you start writing, know this is my world, this is what's happened, this is what the U.S. looks like now and how all of it works, or does that come organically as you go as well?
I actually thought, like, really early on, established the world and what it looked like. I drew a map of like which countries were left and what alliances were made, in probably much more detail than you'll ever see in the books, because basically I plotted out what happened in that World War III and what areas were no longer habitable and all of these things, and all the different lines of, like, I probably spent way too much time figuring out like the socioeconomical ramifications of which country is like now allying with what country and which countries refuse to join the union, or and they're all new countries. So there's this whole like political backstory of like which country fought, which alliance was at war at which alliance, and what's still happening overseas, and some of which you'll see, but it is the world itself. I've always enjoyed world building, and I think it's really fun to come up with once I wrote book 1, where I established like how do the powers work. Every power level is different. For example, like the A class, B class, or C class, like depending on how. Basically, I wanted all the metahumans in my world their powers basically are dependent on like they have a limited number of time per day that they can use their powers. So once they've used it, then they can't use it for the next 24-hour period. So it's a different sort of look at superpowers and abilities, because you have to be more mindful about how you use your powers. And then, and so that was an element that I established early on. But overall, I think, like, for me, world building, like there's some details I discovered along the way, but I pretty much plotted the world building, which is a funny, like, and it's interesting to think about, like, even though I do consider myself a pantser, how much of this series I did very much envision out from an early stage. So like some of the confrontations and the fight scenes and the stuff that, like, I've been planning one particular scene in book 3 since book 1, and I didn't get to do it until, so that was like a fun way to be like, oh yes, I'm finally gonna like write the scene that I've been waiting for. But I've had a lot of these like moments in my head, and just like planning it out and getting the opportunity to like, okay, yes, now I'm getting to that chapter. I'm getting to that point in the whole series where we're getting, it's coming full circle. So that's very satisfying.
Sounds like you'd have a lot of bonus material too if you ever wanted to release it, of all the stuff that you've got of the world itself and the disaster and how it's split up.
Yeah, I mean, potentially I have a whole timeline that I could release. And then I did these fun for Not Your Villain, I did all the deleted scenes. Well, deleted as far as they were cut for length, but I still consider it part of the story, the canon. So those are an extra that are available on my website. I'll probably do something similar for backup, but I'm not at that stage yet.
Right. It's good to know about the villain extras. I'll be going to check those out.
Yeah, they're fun. They're all in one PDF, and my book designer, CB Messer, was amazing, and she formatted them the same way as the book. Because we had a lot of extra art as well, because she does these amazing like chapter headers for each chapter, and she's so talented and amazing designing the covers and the interior of the book to really, capture that feel. And so Not Your Villain actually in edits went from it. Yeah, it was cut a lot. So I was, it's really sad as a writer to kind of like see these scenes go. But, as far as, yes. And my editors were great about like, this scene is great, but it kind of slows down the pacing, or like this scene takes us in a different tone or direction, and like while they're great, they don't fit in the story at that moment and kind of take us away from the main action. So I understand why they had to go, and yes, the story is stronger overall, but I like them as a extra.
Yeah, we've all gotten used to those on DVDs over time, so there's really no reason books can't have them too.
Yeah, it is a fun extra to have the deleted scenes.
So you mentioned one more book in the series, the fourth one. Is that going to be it for these heroes? Yeah, I can't say for sure that like the door is completely closed, but for this arc, this storyline, that will be the series. It will be completed with Abby's book. We could treat it like the Marvel universe. Now, phase 1 is over, and there can be a phase 2 eventually. Once you figure out what that is. What got you started in writing?
I love like telling stories, and I think I was like very young when I tried like writing a story for myself. I had like a old notebook that I would scribble this adventure story in when I was like in 6th grade, and then I'd kind of start, and in every recess I'd pick it up or I'd work on it when I was supposed to be doing homework or other stuff in class. And so I've always wanted to tell stories. I didn't really think of it seriously as a career. And then after college, I went to school for science, and so I was going to get a PhD and do all this stuff. And I, ended up going a different route, and really writing has been a journey where it kind of it ties back to, and I guess like the Sidekick Squad series and the titles where we're all, the titles are all about like, hey, I'm not who you think I am. I'm not the person that you're claiming that I should be or expect me to be. It comes back to where, as a queer woman of color, I didn't really see a lot of myself in books growing up. And so what I really hoped to write was like, especially when I was writing Sidekick for the first time, was I wanted to write a book for like my 16-year-old self. Mm-hmm. So this is the book I wanted to read. And I wanted it to exist. And so writing, and then I also just like telling stories. So I wanted the stories to be fun. I wanted them to be happy. There's drama in them. But overall, I wanted to see like kids like myself and kids who looked like me and other kids that reflect the world that we live in. Because, trans kids exist, asexual kids exist, mentally ill kids exist. And there's there aren't enough stories where they get to be part of something that's just like a superhero adventure or something fun and fantastic like this. And so I hope, and I think there definitely now in the past, 5-10 years, there have been a lot more stories, and I think that's great. So I'm just really excited that now people are writing more and more and reading more and more, and there's a lot of great books to come.
And one of the things I don't want to knock the coming out story, because those are very important and very needed. But in these books, that's not really part of it. I mean, in some places there is, but this is a much bigger adventure these teenagers are on that just doesn't revolve around their sexuality so much. There's so much more going on, which I think is awesome and gives everybody something different to read.
Yeah, I love that. Like, I want us to have the breadth and of different types of genres and stories that there are for like able-bodied cis heterosexual people. Like, I want there to be like so many stories to choose from, and so and I really love. I think there's a lot of power in having joyful stories as well, and stories where yes, like sexuality is a part of it, but who I am is not just my sexuality. Like, every person is multitudes, where who you are is made up of so many things, like your passions, your dreams, your hopes, your hobbies, your friends, your like who you are as a person isn't just one thing, and we're all. I love like being able to explore that and getting to see. One of the things I just writing is that I want people to see that like people in the LGBTQ community are like fully nuanced people that get to be complicated and have flaws and go on adventures or fall in love or discover more about themselves in the way that all straight people can.
Well said. I like that for sure. Who were some of your author influences as you got started on your writing journey?
So I really loved the Harry Potter series growing up. As a huge influence for me. That was one of the first kind of ways I started writing was Harry Potter fan fiction, because I love that world so much. And just I read so much fantasy, like Ursula Le Guin, Diane Duane, Owen Colfer, like tons of fantasy, Jane Yolen. I started to read a lot more widely, but it was like, I think when I was a kid, there was a point when I would like go to the YA section and just read like everything in the library. So I would pretty much read everything, but I tended to love like fantasy and sci-fi the most.
Nice. And you now you get to write your own.
Yeah, I'm really lucky.
Is there a genre you want to branch into as you close up the Sidekick series?
I'm excited to write more fantasy. So the Sidekick Squad is more sci-fi, speculative. So I'm working on some fantasy stuff. I'm excited to share it. I have some contemporary stuff. I have a short story coming out next year in the next All Out anthology. So that'll be fun. It's like a very fluffy high school romance that's just set in like there's the only magic is the friendship and the romance. So.
Aww. Sometimes that's all you need, though.
Yeah. So it's fun because when I was writing it, I hadn't written like just contemporary in a long time, so that was really fun to try and explore that. Plus, I got to put a lot of puns in there, so it's all good.
You seem to travel a lot. I feel like every time I see you on social media, it's like, I'm going to this event, or here I am at this event. Come see me over here. What drives you to be out on the road so much?
So I like the opportunity to like meet readers, especially like I really love, I go to I live in Los Angeles, and I'm really lucky to have the opportunity to go to a lot of events that are fairly local. I also think it's really important to travel when I have the opportunity to, and I'm lucky that I've been able to, and sometimes I will just commit to doing it out of my own pocket because I want to meet readers in those areas. So I love, I already said it. I love meeting readers, but especially in places where you don't get a lot of LGBTQ resources, or teens don't necessarily get to see a lot of authors or books with this content come their way, and getting to meet teens in small towns, or getting to meet people, or even do I do a lot of web chats And so that's fun, chatting with like libraries or classrooms through the power of the internet, which is amazing. But part of like being like on panels and having these conversations is important to me, just because like, you know, I get to share with people that might not have heard of my books before or are just learning about it for the first time. And so that's always a very special moment to me when someone's like, oh my gosh, like this is exactly what I've been looking for. I didn't know it exists, and now I do. And so that's very meaningful. And sometimes I get to meet people who have already read the books, and that's very important to me. And that's part of the most rewarding things to me as a writer, is knowing that like your work has made an impact on someone, whether it's just making them smile or you know, to the depth of having someone like I've like cried over several really long emails, just because you know, sometimes people are like really sweet and talk about like, oh, this is my coming out experience, or like you know, getting to like, for me, like if so, like I want people to see that they're valid. Mm-hmm. And so knowing that someone else has read my work and recognized themselves, that's one of the like most rewarding things I've ever done. Mm-hmm. I was in Seattle recently, earlier this year, and one of the events I did was with the Seattle Public Library, where we went to LGBT Youth Center, and that was really powerful, just to like hang out with kids and chat with them, and what are they looking forward to as far as like, hey, like what's powerful to me, like what's fun to me, like getting kids to like, and a lot of this is like stuff that I totally resonate with, when they like connect with a character on TV or are upset that, you know, that character got killed off in one season or whatever because of TV. But they, you know, it's always great to chat with people. Everyone's always going through something.
Yeah, for sure. So we've hinted a little bit about some stuff that's coming up for you. You're working on Sidekick 4. You've got a short story coming out next year. Anything else we should know about?
I'm also writing the new Ben 10 original graphic novels with Boom Studios and Cartoon Network. So one is already out. It's called The Truth Is Out There. It's where Ben 10 is part of the Cartoon Network show where Ben can turn into 10 different aliens. So it's fun. It's a fun middle grade romp. So I'm doing a number of those graphic novels with Boom. So those will be available throughout. I can't recall the dates off the top of my head, but another one is coming out in July, and then one more in October of this year, and then next year there will be some more coming as well.
What's it like writing for graphic novel? Because I mean, that's a different sort of animal than a novel that, you know, is 60 or 70,000 words long.
Mm-hmm. It was definitely a new experience. It was a lot of fun trying a different medium. It like definitely writing a script goes differently as far as and I catch myself like, oh, I'm being too descriptive. This is literally the only person who will see this is the artist. And it's also a great collaborative process. So it's really fun to work with the artists and editors and really like bring together this story that exists in its own medium. So it's like, it's not just me, the writer, but like what the artist is bringing and collaborating with them and getting to like, you know, I'll like write the dialogue and the action and then they'll like imagine it in a certain way of like, oh, I didn't think of that. And that's really fun. So I really like the graphic novel format. I'm hoping to do more. And so I'm really excited to be working on these projects and yeah, hopefully I'll be able to share more upcoming projects. Cool.
And speaking of, what is the best way for people to keep up with you online?
You can always find me on Twitter and Instagram at CBLEE_CBLEE because it's double the trouble. My website is cb-lee.com, and then you can find more links to other ways you can connect with me. Usually Twitter and Instagram where you can find me the most, but as far as yeah, it's where you can connect with me. And my website has like fun stuff. I try to update it with like writing resources and my upcoming events. And I also have a newsletter, which will have some special tidbits, probably like the deleted scenes, which is the very first place I offered the Not Your Villain extra scenes.
Very cool. Well, CB, thank you so much for hanging out with us. We wish you all the success with Not Your Backup when it comes out on June 4th.
Thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate it. I'm so excited, and I hope everyone enjoys the book.
This week's interview transcript is brought to you by our community on Patreon. If you'd like to read the author interview for yourself, simply head over to the show notes page for this episode at biggayfictionpodcast.com.
And thanks again to CB for hanging out with us for a little bit. I'm looking forward to reading Not Your Backup just as soon as it gets on audio. The audiobooks to this series have been so extraordinary that I think I'm going to wait to take in this book in that format.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, just a quick reminder before we leave you for this week. Did you know that the Big Gay Fiction Podcast has its very own Patreon page? Well, we do. Patreon is a way for fans to engage with all kinds of artists and writers and musicians and podcasters as well. It's a great way to support the kinds of creative content that you enjoy the most. If you're curious about what kind of bonus material we deliver to our fans every single month, just go to patreon.com/biggayfictionpodcast. Now, coming up in episode 192, we talked to Aidan Wayne. They've got 2 books coming out this spring, and another is going to follow this summer, and we've got all of the details on those.
Yeah, it was a pleasure talking to Aidan. They pack so much stuff into their books. They talk about how they really squish all the tropes and all the concepts into these books one by one, and it was really great to talk to them about it.
Yeah. So guys, remember, no matter where life takes you, the journey will always be sweeter when you have a book. Until next time, everyone, please keep turning those pages and keep reading.
For detailed show notes and links to everything discussed in this episode, go to biggayfictionpodcast.com. New episodes are available every Monday at all major podcast distributors. You can also find us on YouTube. I'm Derek McLean. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.